G'day and welcome to episode 5 of the It's Not About That podcast. Today I'm chatting with the fabulous Emma Russell, art director, design extraordinaire, outdoor adventurer and self-confessed oversharer. It's a really great chat, so I hope you enjoy. She is a goldmine of thoughtful insight and I was stoked to get a chance to dig a little deeper with my friend Emma Russell. Let's go. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which this podcast was recorded, the Yuggera, Yugara, and Yugarapul people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So today I have a beautiful friend who I have been friends with for, I think it's probably 5 years now, give or take. 4, something.
Easy, right?
Some amount of time.
Yeah.
Could be. Emma Russell. Now, we first met back in a date that I cannot remember, but so your company had hired me to come in and do some work and we'd had a pre-production call and I was coming in the office. I think we were just running through the concept or just doing more pre-production on it. But I came into your office and got the lift upstairs and I've walked in and you greeted me with the biggest ginormous smile.
Oh, did I?
And literally, because I was thinking back around this the other night, you did not stop smiling for the duration of that meeting.
Oh, I don't remember.
And that's always sat with me because I was like, it's so warm and welcoming. And I was like, I really like this person.
Oh, that's so sweet. You know what's sad? I don't remember that moment, but you do. That's so sad.
You're like, I don't even remember meeting you.
No, how funny. But that's such a nice thing to say.
Yeah, it was in one of those like the rooms with all the windows in the middle of your thing. And it was great. Was it a stand-up desk?
Yeah, I think I know the meeting room.
Yeah.
I think I know the meeting room. It was the one that used to sit in like right in the middle and like all of the desks were around and the kitchen was around. And it was,
very open.
Yeah.
Very scary.
Yeah. But I think, I don't know, I feel like because when we bring people in to do work on jobs, like those jobs where you get to like engage people from the outside world, they're like the outsiders.
Yeah, the outsiders.
They're generally like the really exciting, engaging jobs. And so like it can't help but be infectious. But like I feel like you can't help but approach those situations with like this kind of infectious enthusiasm. You're also like, you know, a big smiling like bundle of joy. So I feel like, I don't know. I remember like my favourite memories of all those jobs were the flights down. So like it was you, me and Christy on those flights. And I just remember the stories, inappropriate and appropriate, that we would trade. And those shoots were like, they were big days because we'd go all the way to Melbourne in the first flight down, shoot all day, cabs and whatnot, setting up and trying to wrangle talent and stuff, and then we'd come home that afternoon. That's a long day by anyone's standards.
Yeah.
But I don't remember feeling anything less than buzzed the whole time. Like you have a great energy. So I probably felt that the moment the elevator opened and I was like, yeah, this is my guy.
That's fun. I would have been looking dazed and confused. I'd like, what's this big building?
Yeah.
Like, you guys work in a playground?
It has a bit of a funny vibe, doesn't it, that Flight Centre building? Like when you get in there, it feels, I think like when I think about it now, like I couldn't work in a more different place. But like you see this big gleaming building in the city and the gates at the front that you use your swipe card and the marble in the lobby or whatever stone they'd chosen. Like it does have a very, when I think about it as an external person now, it has a very impressive facade.
Oh, yeah. I was like, wow. Especially from a work from home kind of guy.
Yeah.
I'm like,
where am I?
Yeah, like the lift takes me up there. Like I have to use stairs at home. Now, you kind of answered my question, but did you greet everyone that beautifily? Or do you reckon you were just saying it's kind of the excitement for that job?
I like to approach people with kindness, I think. I always try to be nice. Like I think at bare minimum. And I do, like I'm a chronic overthinker. I'm deep down, I can be quite an anxious person sometimes. And I think sometimes that could be, you could misconstrue that as being that I'm a pessimist. I think I'm a planner, but I do think I'm an optimist as well. And I feel like most people, I try to always believe that people are good and kind. And I think when I meet new people, I always want to assume the best, like that they're good people too.
Totally.
And so I think, I don't know, I'd like to think that I always greet people in that kind of warm and welcoming, come along, let's have a chat and let's, see what we can do.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's almost like I feel I do the same thing where it's like, give me a reason not to like you.
Yeah,
I'm
my baseline assumption is that you're a great human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can very quickly go down.
You could be a piece of shit.
But like, we should all start there. And it's hard, I think, especially in this day and age, not to judge the book by the cover.
Yeah.
Because like, could be a haircut, could be the car you drive, could be a T-shirt, could be a social media post, whatever you've interacted with this person before even having a verbal conversation or a face-to-face.
Yeah.
It's very easy and very risky at the same time to make an assumption before you've actually had 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 minutes with someone, which can change everything. And I think it's important to have that blank canvas per se and just go, we're all good, let's start there.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's really interesting, because I think that, like you rightly touched on, right, there's so many ways that you can interact with another person these days, not just in that moment that you actually meet them. Like, you can quickly make assumptions based on their online presence, if they're posting things online, what they're saying, what they're posting, what they're resharing, even things they don't necessarily, they're not doing anything, they're just posting or facilitating a reshare of something that they believe in.
Yep.
And you can make so many assumptions on that. But I feel like particularly the last few years, like what I do now, I feel like has taught me that you can't really judge people by like their covers. I mean, I will always try to be like that, but I think there's a lot of people in the world who you look at and you think, oh, they, easily I could make an assessment about you from how you present yourself or what you do. But the truth is that the world is not black and white. The world is a rich myriad of greys, and you are most likely nothing like what you come across at first glance.
And I think, it's, if we, especially with the social media side of things, right, like you can kind of gauge a perception on someone before you even meet them, based on all those things that they have shared, liked, commented on, whatever. But it's like, I think it all comes back to, if you stood face to face with someone, your interaction will 100% be different to an online interaction versus a phone call or whatever.
They're a person.
Yeah.
I don't understand. So like, this happens all the time when I drive, right? Like, so I'll be with someone in the car and they get frustrated with another person. And I always, like, I'll say to Matt, I'm like, that my partner, that, you don't know what they're going through. You have no idea. You're like, they might have had the worst day and they've just cut you off, or they might be really sick. Like, I just think if you always think that people are at their level, like trying to do the right thing by other people, like we're social animals, humans. Like, we just want to work together for the most part. Most people want to work together and do good. So I feel like if you just assume that of other people, whether you see them or not, and whether as you move through the world. It takes something off your shoulders too, because you're not constantly feeling like people are doing anything to get you. You're just kind of assuming that everyone's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it is, I think I've stopped to analyse myself over the years. Like, if I'm having a bad day, kind of going, I can feel that, so that my interactions are probably being affected by that. And like, if, say, like the car example, like if you're driving along and you're like, that person just cut me off or whatever, you're like, hang on, if I don't get upset by this,
don't react,
how is my day going to be different versus if I crack the shits and like stay boiled up over this? And quite easily, the simplest thing to do is to not react and just go, they're off now, like they're away from me, I'm safe, just carry on. And it's like, but if you hold on to it, you're holding on to it.
Yeah.
Like,
you have to live with that. Yeah.
Like holding
and it may have been nothing. Like, it might have been something totally inconsequential and they didn't even know that,
Yes.
And then you live with that for the whole day.
I know. Could you imagine, like, they're like giving you the finger, beeping your horn, and you're just like, yep, just traveling along. You've probably done nothing. It's probably all in their head because, they might have had an argument with a loved one. They might be stressed at work. They might have had a death in the family. Like, there are so many things to why people's behaviour is what it is.
Yeah.
I think we just need to, like,
be generous.
Yeah.
I think be generous with like what people are going through. There's a really interesting quote that like we talk about sometimes at work, which is like, everyone has a backpack and you can't see their backpack or how big it is or how heavy it is, what they're carrying, So like, just assume that everyone has this, like, everyone might have this load that's going on in their lives. And if you just approach them and try and be generous with what they're going through and what's happening, I don't know. I think it makes your life better anyway, you know, because you're not constantly approaching people and thinking, oh, they said that comment because, you know, they're out to get me. No, there's something going on behind them that you can't see.
Always is. Yeah. And I think I've thought about this more with like, if I see someone doing something that I would choose not to do, or if I disagree with, I just go, I feel sorry that they're choosing to do that. That's not my thing. And I just move on. Like, rather than being like, that person's an asshole. Like, I hate you, which I sometimes feel. But like, I think you just got to go, that obviously says more about their insecurities or their processing of their mental health at any one time. Like, it's just... It's not
about you at all.
No, it very rarely is.
Yeah.
It's only, we can only control ourselves. Like, we teach the kids, like, who's the boss of your body? And it's like, I'm the boss of my body. Are you the boss of this? Like, it's a great little ABC thing. But
that's like, awesome.
And it's so true. Like, I can only control me.
Yeah.
You know, everyone else can control themselves.
Yeah.
And we should just, like, relax. Just relax. It's hard. It is very hard. So, we are in the same industry. We met because of the industry. I'm super keen to find out what led you down the creative path or the dark side. No, it's not dark. It's beautiful. It's full of colours.
Beautiful and bright and rainbows. So the funny thing is, like, my mum and dad always said, like, I was born with like a pencil or a paintbrush in my hand. So like there's pictures of me painting on like a little easel when I was like this big with like ringlets.
Cute.
So I've always been creative, and I feel like it was a no-brainer for me. Like, as I went through school, I always wanted to do creative things. Like all the assignments I enjoyed. It's still on.
Yeah.
All the assignments I enjoyed were things like making, you know, when we got to make books and we got to illustrate the whole book. So like any way that I could apply creative skills, whether it was through writing or whether it was through drawing or problem solving even, was where I was in my bliss. And what's really interesting is this, like, I feel like, I don't know if it was my schooling or me as a person as like a teenager, but so like when I left school, I wanted to be an artist. I was convinced that, like, to be a creative person, you had to be an artist, right? So when I was in high school, I did a course to get guaranteed entry into the College of Art in Brisbane.
Okay.
And I was funny because I was in grade 11 and I was going to live drawing classes in the evenings after school, right? So as a 16, 15-year-old, I was drawing nude people on a Tuesday evening, and then I go back to school the next day.
I chose the wrong subjects in school.
Yeah, it was a winner. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. But when I left school, I went into the course that I'd started doing that guaranteed entry for, which was fine art. And so I did 2 years of fine art, and I did sculpture and jewellery and printmaking and painting. They were the kind of disciplines that were a part of that degree. And I decided I want to major in painting. Side note, I'm an awful painter. I'm a really bad painter. I'm tremendously bad. And I did about a semester of it. And worst grade I've ever got in my life, I think it was a pass conceded. Didn't even know that was a grade, right? And usually I was a very good student. Like, I always got good grades, and it destroyed me because I'd tied my identity so much to being a creative person. Yeah. But what serendipitously happened is that same semester I had enrolled in doing electives in digital design. And I don't know if it was there the whole time, and I just never, if I was so focused on being an artist that I hadn't explored any other creative avenues, but I did that elective, and I loved graphic design. Like, it was just everything that I liked about like being creative and applying creative principles like color and, you know, composition and stuff. But it had a practical, functional application, which I think I can be quite a practical person sometimes. So it had this beautiful sort of like harmony of being creative but having a real world application. Not that art doesn't, like, art is beautiful for its own sake and can be social commentary and all the rest, but it gave me a vehicle to merge those two parts. And so I decided that I was like, okay, well, I think I'm obviously crap at painting. Really bad. So I'm gonna switch degrees, which put me back a year in my studies because I was 2 years in, and you know, I had only had so much prerequisite from that degree that I could transfer. Fortunately, more than some. and then decided I was going to be a designer, and I just loved it. I never regretted it, never looked back. It was the best decision I ever made because I was good at it. It spoke to me in all the right ways, and it had more of a commercial application too. I think when I was younger, I wouldn't have had the tenacity to push through with being an artist. I think it's really hard to be an artist.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And I feel like it for some people, like I felt like I was a mature kid, but I think it would take a sense of maturity and tenacity that would be better suited to someone who's potentially older. Like they might have more gumption than I had back then.
Yeah.
I'd probably be better at it today. I'd probably have more staying power. But yeah, I loved design, and then I ended up in a small agency, interning. I think I just sent out, when I finished my degree, I did my portfolio, and I sent out like a bunch of emails to like 30 different small agencies, marketing agencies in Brisbane, to just see if anyone would take me in, just for experience, because I hadn't done any sort of real world experience in that regard, and one person replied, and that was the place that I ended up working first, which was just a small agency in Brisbane. My boss there at the time was incredibly generous and managed to, he kind of gave me free rein in a lot of ways. We didn't have a lot of like senior creative leadership in terms of like there was no designer that I could learn from. So a lot of it was self-taught stuff. But what that meant is being thrown in the deep end on a lot of jobs, you got to learn. I got to learn so quickly. And then when I finally went on to Flight Centre, which is obviously where I met you some years later, I had in, the short, I think it was maybe 4 years that I was there, I'd managed to accrue a portfolio commensurate with being a senior designer. Whereas if you were in a smaller agency and you were only being drip fed small jobs or finished art and things like that, I would never have progressed or my skill level so far. So yeah, I just kind of, I don't know, it was an interesting way of ending up in the creative arts. I think and I'm kind of going through this sort of renaissance again, I guess, because like my current role, when I left Flight Centre and I went out my own and I was going to be a freelancer, I was very much offering like branding, creative strategy, photography, all of that. And one of my clients is who I now work for because I just loved the brand and I loved the people in the brand. But the role I feel now is more of a marketing role, and I still do a lot of creative stuff. I still do layouts, and I'm photographing, weekly, and shoots and stuff. But it taught me again that to be a creative person, now being in a marketing role, and I'm looking at a lot of data and, how do we strategize our marketing campaigns, and it's more theory and it's a lot of spreadsheets and, not traditional creative work. But it doesn't mean I'm not creative still. And it's so funny because I wrestled with that for so long. Like the definition of, again, like, when I was I had tied so much of my identity to creativity being an artist. And then I'd tied so much of my identity to creativity being a designer. And now I think like you can be creative in so many ways, and it doesn't just have to be a traditionally creative discipline, if that makes sense.
You know what I think? Yeah. I think you've grown.
Probably.
This is maturity. I hate the word maturity, but
I know.
That and being comfortable in your own skin. Like, even though you're now facilitating like marketing skills, it doesn't mean that you're not creative. And like, that's a comfort thing. So you don't have to be seen every day doing something creative. It's like, as we grow and become adults, I'm still waiting, but it'll happen. I my frontal lobe, it's coming. It's I ordered it on Gumtree. So it's that being comfortable with who we are, and I think it's like, it sounds like for me, for you rather, it's you've got this exceptional design skill, but you understand that practicing the marketing side with the business you're in now is just as important, and not doing something per se creative every day, it doesn't mean you've lost it. This
is like therapy. It really is.
But this is, I've often wondered how, because say my aim and hope with some of this podcasting stuff is people younger, because I had all these crazy ideas when I was in my teens and early 20s, and probably took the long path for a lot of my choices because I was just young and naive and was just like, oh, this will happen. Oh, that didn't happen. Oh, bugger.
Yeah.
So like, how would we explain how your comfort and your kind of self-identity now to a 20-year-old version of yourself, and say, hey, look, or even younger when you were like, I only want to be an artist. And then like, and then you aged a bit and went, hang on, I could apply that artistry skill, the good side of it, and then put that into digital. And then now, 15 years later, you're like, okay, now I'm applying like a bit of marketing to this. And you're just adding all these fantastic skills. But like,
I think it speaks to like, there's a really great Steve Jobs speech where he does like the commencement speech. I think it might be at Stanford or Harvard or one of those beautiful institutions. And he says that you can never connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking back.
It is interesting.
And so I feel like if you follow what you're passionate about, particularly in creative industries, right, more so than, well, I think maybe it speaks for everyone. If you're passionate about cars, go be a mechanic and see where it leads. Like do whatever, put one foot in front of the next, kind of follow the path. I think if you follow your passion and if you follow your curiosity, it'll lead you places that you're meant to be. And it doesn't mean you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to know, okay, well, I love doing this and I can apply it and I can earn a living and, I can move and grow within that. I think if you apply that to learning, but also your career, I think that's never a bad thing. And I don't think you can anticipate looking forward where that's going to lead.
Yeah.
You have no idea. You can't, I would never think that I would be doing the role that I'm doing now, or that I'm applying the principles that I'm applying now in my everyday role. Like, the learnings that I've managed to pick up along the way. I don't think there's any substitute for just going through it, but following your nose. I think you have to. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard, isn't it? Like you want to guide people as fast as not as fast, but you want to guide people to the best path.
Yeah.
But obviously paths are made by making mistakes as well.
Yeah,
right?
I think it can't be too precious. Like you have to be willing to go, okay, well, this is a risk, and I might take a misstep, or I might look back in a few months and be like, oh, what did I do? But if you don't take the risk, then you don't know. I think in my experience, more often than not, if you follow what you're passionate about and if you follow your curiosity, you're going to end up in a great place that's meant for you.
Yep.
Because naturally you're already aligned and it's kind of like a homing beacon. You're just sort of moving towards it.
Absolutely. I think it's so important not to get, like, obviously there's very real world things we need to focus on and worry about, like paying bills and, creating wealth and having a house or whatever your personal financial goals are. But I think it is so important to like be true to yourself and follow passions.
Yeah.
And if you can manage that into a career, then perfect.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great example because like my career, like the path that I took to deviate from the arts into the design, obviously I said like it resonated with me personally, but it also was a smarter professional choice for me because I could build a career in a easier fashion than being an artist, which is obviously going to be a really hard slog. But then if I look at where that's dovetailed sort of with my hobbies, like a lot of the time, so like when I was at Flight Centre, a lot of the work that I did was, in the end, was led because of the fact that I'd personally pursued passion projects. So, I'd started my career from starting a path of curiosity, but then my passion projects on the side, which were like photographing things and picking up a camera and then eventually that leading to another camera and my skills improving, that ended up coming kind of in a roundabout way and meeting my professional life. And I think that often happens for people. So like, you might pursue a career that's led by passion, but is obviously commercially, economically viable for your life circumstances. Yes. But then you also on the side have these passion projects that fuel you. And then more often than not, depending on the circumstances, you'll reference them and they'll come together and drift apart many times throughout your life. And they end up, in my experience, like the work that I've done to myself in those passion projects, the self-improvement and the improvement of my skills has accelerated my career more than if I had not touched them.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, the following your passion and your curiosity can apply to your career. But if you decide that it doesn't, I think if you at least follow it for yourself, more often than not, it'll end up feeding in.
And it'll just be healthier for your
mental
mind.
well-being. Yeah, I
totally.
think it's really important not to approach those projects because some people do. Like there's hustle culture is a big thing, right? And some people embrace it and some people reject it. And they say like the commodify, like, making all your hobbies into commodities can be problematic.
Yes.
I think if you do things just for yourself, that's a good place to start and then just see where it leads.
Yeah. I think that's key, is right. If you're instantly going, I want to sell this, or I want people to buy it. It's kind of like it's almost the vibe rubs off the wrong way.
Yeah. Well, and I think that'll die. Like that'll fade when the going gets tough. You have to dig really deep, and if you don't have that undercurrent of genuine enthusiasm and passion for what you're doing, or for the subject matter, or for the problem you're solving, it's going to be so much harder to push through those moments. You really have to have something that you can reach down into yourself and hold on to when it's hard.
Yes, and that's like particularly in creative fields. There's a lot of hard times because I find it's such an emotive field, right? Like you're putting your creativity out on the table, which is almost like you're saying, I thought of this, I've put it out, and if someone goes, oh no, that doesn't work, we'll go this way, it can hurt. Because you've put a little bit of yourself on the table. But then as you age now, like if a client for me comes back with a review or changes and whatever on an edit, I'm like, perfect. Like we're crafting it to be even better now.
Yeah.
So it's like,
I actually think that's maturity too, is knowing that you're not the only person that has a perspective, and your perspective isn't the right one, or isn't the only one. So like being able to take constructive feedback can give us a better result overall. But it's important to know too when to ignore it. Not necessarily when they're a paying client though. But I feel like there are people we've gone through work recently, and there was some doubt cast on something that we were doing, and I it cast out in myself, and then I had to reach out to some people in my network professionally, and I was like, what do you think of what I'm trying to do here? Do you think that there's merit in, and have I gone off course? Because it can make you second guess yourself a little bit sometimes. Totally. So I feel like sometimes you take the criticism and run with it. Sometimes you take the criticism and throw it back and go, it's okay, I actually know. But yeah, feedback on work is I think that's a sign of maturing. Like knowing that, okay, well, if we take this and we incorporate it, we're only going to make it better, because it's two brains, not just mine.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's knowing that it's kind of, in my industry, in my line of work, I'm trying to facilitate their vision. Their vision,
of course. So obviously, I'm the client more often than not. I'm like, this is what we need.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when when we were working together in Flights in a Day, it's like, I was always so interested is like the concepts and things that you came up with. Like, how do you know that that's the right thing for that particular brief?
You know what? I don't think you ever do. I don't think you do. I think that that's a great question. I think you have guardrails that you start to develop as you grow as a creative, right? And you know that like there's sort of bumpers on the side, and that if the brief kind of fits within these sort of bumpers, you'll be more or less okay, and you can tweak things as you go. But I do think that like nothing's certain. You can make a campaign and it can totally flop, and you have to be willing to go through that and learn from it, and just kind of be a bit philosophical about if that's going to happen. Well, sure, this might not work, but I think leaning on other people who are more experienced than you, who may have a perspective, like seeking diverse voices in within your immediate circle, is always a good thing.
Yep.
Looking to senior creatives and saying, this is what my concept is, this is my messaging, does this make sense, is a great place to start. What else would I say? Often, I used to have an art director that I used to work with, and she's fantastic. She had this very wry, straight down the line, and she used to say, if it feels like you're pushing shit uphill, she used to say, if it feels like you're pushing shit uphill, it's probably that the brief is shit, right? So like often I feel like what happens is that as you work through this what's being asked, because I get a brief and then I'll pass that on to someone like you to then execute that brief. If it's not making sense, if you can't actually pull out the crux of like what needs to be achieved, it's that there's something wrong. Like we don't know who we're actually talking to, or we haven't fully articulated to ourselves who we are and what we can solve for that person. I think a lot of it comes down to like a question well asked is a question half answered, right? And I think if you know what you're trying to achieve from the outset, it does make that process a lot easier.
Yeah.
But the short answer is I don't think you ever know 100%. I don't think you do. I think it's always a risk attached to making creative stuff, and that's like what you say, you put yourself out there and you hope that it works, and you can make a few calculated guesses, but sometimes it doesn't work. There's some brands that have put out some like awesome creative work and it might look fantastic and everyone might jump up in arms, but then does it achieve the goals of the campaign, or does it actually do what it was designed to do? And sometimes you'll have this room full of people who are very smart people, I'm sure, and they'll put out something and you'd be like, what were you thinking? Tone deaf,
yes.
High paying execs who say things all the time and you're like, how did that even go pass through the
You got to
chain?
wonder sometimes, hey, like some of that stuff that comes through, you're just like, are you kidding?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Surely, even if there's like just spelling mistakes and things, you're like, at that level, it's just like, my spelling's awful, by the way, so I'm not criticizing, but at that level with the amount of money that's sitting in those roles, it's like, wow.
Well, we're all human at the end of the day, right?
I think the blinkers, right? Like people just are so focused. They probably had a short time limit. Actually, that was one thing. So my mate he's gotten out of design now, but he was a fabulous designer. And my interpretation of his journey is he just got fed up with, he was basically a unicorn. He was awesome at a lot of things, but his boss that he was working for at the last job just didn't, it was just never enough, right? And he's just like, he just wanted to chill out and focus on other things. But I had a conversation with him once, and I'd send him photos of billboards. And I was like, what the hell is this? Like, this is awful.
Billboards are a classic for it.
And he just went, look, it's probably a bad brief and client direction. He's like, the designer was probably sitting there saying, hey, let's do this. And they went, no, stick to this. And that gave me a really good open mind to the fact that don't always attack the person who created it.
No, it's like they talk about, like, you'll make a camel with like 5 humps because everyone's kind of sitting, like you've got someone who's like, oh, well, they don't understand that. With billboards are a great example because they're so often done wrong. Like you've got, what I think they say 3 seconds. You've got to get someone's attention, to communicate something with them, and also communicate who said it, right? And they want to throw on the URL and the phone number and maybe the address. Sometimes you see a postcode on a billboard and you're like, I don't need to know where your postcode is. I can just Google the business.
Yeah.
Like you don't even need a website these days. No. The brand name's enough. You're just going to type it into Google anyway and it's going to find it for you. Or they'll have really complex graphics, or they'll have like 3 images or 4 images, and you've got seconds to piece that together. But it's sometimes it's short-sightedness from the person who's briefing or the person who's receiving the communications, and they go, oh, well, I need to tick these boxes. And that comes down to people who are willing to take that risk. I also think that it's communication as well. Like if they're really receptive, designers will often try and push back, and not always rightly. Sometimes they'll push back for the wrong reasons. Like they want to preserve the integrity of the creative and not necessarily communicate. That's a problem. But if there's more of an open dialogue between all the parties that are working together, I think that's a good thing. Because if they're receptive to the designer saying, hey, this is too much, there's too much going on, then it's only going to give a better result. But often, in some institutions, not all, but the marketing will be sitting there with a checklist of the things that they want to see on the billboard. And it takes strong people to go, you know what, I actually think that you're right, and I'm listening to your ideas, and I think that we can do a better job.
Yes. I guess it's being able to communicate that. Not just say, hey, that's wrong. It's being able to say, hey, look, for these reasons,
it's wrong.
Yeah.
For these reasons, it's wrong.
It's just simply wrong.
No, I agree. It's because I remember. I think that's one of the things. Like, so I've worked with creatives who can't articulate why something's wrong. They can't say, "Hey, this is wrong," because
it's just the vibe.
It's the vibe. It's Marbo. It's the vibe. They if you can't articulate. I think if they don't articulate to themselves first, you're still lost.
Yes.
it's just wrong.
Maybe that's a thing, like I texted the other day. Like maybe if you're going to give feedback, record yourself giving the feedback first. And go, can I interpret what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'd probably be like, no, I can't myself.
Clarity is a big one. Like I find all the time, I'm not a very concise person. That's something I'm always working on, because I think that there's so much of what you say needs nuance. And so I think that it takes someone incredibly clever to deliver feedback that has nuance, but in a concise way. But I feel like if you can't articulate to yourself why something's not right, if you don't have the clarity to be able to go, okay, well, this isn't working for X, Y, Z, how are you ever going to be able to communicate that to someone else and bring them along for the ride?
Yes.
It's not going to happen.
Not making it personal and all those kind of things. I think this is, it's being able to kind of say, potentially here's the facts of why this doesn't work.
Yeah.
And yes, part of it is the 3 seconds that you have for a billboard doesn't need more than 3 words, right? It's like, I saw a billboard yesterday on the way down the coast, and seriously, this guy would have had a book on there. Like, it was like, I think he was a real estate agent. I couldn't quite tell, but...
Small story.
Yeah. Oh, my God. I was just like, I don't...
You're driving, just like...
Yeah. But maybe that's a high, like, traffic build-up zone. Maybe they like people have time for a story.
That's a consideration as well. Context is key.
Yeah.
Maybe they're stuck in traffic and they've got 3 hours to read the size 10 font on your billboard.
But then I'm like, I'd be worried as the person advertising that, are they going to hate me because they're sitting in traffic reading about me? Like, I'm stuck here.
Yeah, maybe that's an that's an interesting perspective.
So let's move down the line to a very not very well documented event called COVID.
No one knows about it. You might need to tell our audience at home what it is.
News to some that there was a period in our lives recently where, and basically I feel like you were, in terms of in Brisbane, you were in the forefront of this because Flight Centre was on the news like every day about, once those borders shut, you guys were just cactus. Like that, you guys were a crushed can thrown in the bin. And you had a massive change, like your career, like, you were I think you were literally about to go on like a 14-day.
I was about to go to WA, yeah.
And that obviously stopped in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. So that was exciting. You had lots of things in the works, and you were doing lots of amazing work with them. And obviously that changed in a heartbeat. How did you deal with that?
It's a community, I think. So COVID is such an interesting phenomenon, I think, to examine because, like you say, it brought my professional life to a halt effectively for quite a few months because, jobs in graphic, no one's looking for graphic designers when the world's going to hell. So it required being in like a bit of a holding pattern for some time. But if I can say this, the great thing about COVID was that we weren't alone. Mm. And not even just in our immediate team all going through it, but like the whole world was going through the same thing. So you didn't feel you were isolated literally. Like you were literally in your home on your own, right? And you were very isolated in that your community had been pulled away from you in a physical sense overnight. So I could no longer go see my friends, but when you looked online, which, there was a lot of scrolling. But when you're online, you felt like you weren't at least the only one going through it. Yeah. And I think what was so fortunate is I remember, it was like a wave, watching a wave in the distance, right? Like, so we were watching, I remember in December, we were watching it happen in like China and Japan. And then in January, it started to trickle into other countries. And then we were watching very early February, I think maybe I could be mistaken slightly, but it was starting to happen in Italy and it was really bad. And they had those terrifying shots of like the bags over people's heads as like ventilation. And our Flight Centre the whole time, probably from late January, we started to see, okay, this country is closing its borders and then this country and this country. And it slowly got more frenetic because we started having, like we had a campaign out for this country and we had to pull it and replace it with creative for something else. And then this country, we had to pull it and replace it. And at first it was like a couple of weeks and then it was a week between those changes. And then it started being every other day. And then progressively it became very clear that, okay, like we're going to have to promote just Australia.
Yeah.
And then even that became untenable, right? And so I guess it gave us some time at work to kind of pull together and try and work through it. And I think sometimes when those, like that WA trip, for instance, that was going to be an amazing trip. Like I was very much looking forward to that. It was like proper road trip adventure, filming for 2-3 weeks, all these places I've always wanted to go. But because we'd kind of seen it coming and we'd had some time to kind of process it, it meant that when it happened, it was all right. It also, context is key. I was looking at that and going, well, there's people over there dying, so I'm fine. It's not. I guess the sense that it was so big meant that you didn't feel alone, and it also gave you a lot of sense of like, okay, well, what I'm going through is inconvenient at most, and might be a small problem, but realistically, the bigger problem is that this, they've got semi-trailers filled with bodies in New York.
Yep.
So it was, I think, it was an unusual experience, but it was never so dire because you had that frame of reference of my problem is so insignificant and I can work through it. And also, like, when we were first laid off, we were, or not laid off, stood down when we were furloughed. We were all stood down together and, everyone was on the group chat being like, oh, well, looks like I'm cracking into the gin at 12 a.m. to like 12 today. But when that happened, it was a bit stressful because, financially you've got a mortgage, we might have had car finance or something at the time. And you're like, okay, well, we can make that work. We've got, 6 months worth of savings or something in the bank and, we can go through this. But the thing that ended up happening, I think it was 2 weeks later, is that the government announced that assistance, that JobKeeper, and I think, gosh, wasn't I fortunate to be stood down and in a time when that kind of service was offered to us. Whereas if people get stood down all the time or they get, made redundant and they may be on the hunt for a job for months and they don't have that level of support. No. And I just think, gosh, of all the times to be made essentially redundant, stood down, like to have that lifeline was just remarkable. So I think, COVID was rough, but because we were going through it together, it was so much better than it could have been if people go through those circumstances all the day, whether it be that they're ill or, stood down and redundant. It just made it not so bad, I think, in a way.
I had a friend on the podcast as well called Meg, and she calls those situations trauma bonding.
Oh, yeah. Accurate. Yeah, accurate AF. Yeah. Trauma bonding is accurate.
Yeah.
I think it's so funny because I remember feeling sorry for the people who were left behind. So, of our workforce, so we had 50 people in our immediate team, in our creative team. So graphic designers, account managers, basically. And then maybe the broader marketing team might have been another 50 to 70 people. So it's a massive creative little portion of Flight Centre. And of that team, when the COVID first got real, when it first hit Australia and got real bad, so it would have been late March, they started, or mid-March maybe, they started pulling together this team that had to sign essentially an NDA. They were working on a different floor and their job was just to kind of work through the thick of it, right? To work through COVID. And those people, what happened is because they'd started that process, when we all got stood down, they remained and they worked at Flight Centre for the duration of COVID, a lot of them. And I remember feeling for them because they had their small, they probably are fine. I'm sure they were fine, but they had their community of people who remained. But there was kind of this split between the people that remained and us, and we were all going through something, and they felt sorry for us because they were the victim, survivor's guilt kind of thing.
Yeah. We
felt bad for them because they were working through, I think Flight Centre was still having to make people redundant nearly every week, and every week they were like, am I going to go?
Yeah,
is it going to be me? So I felt like the hard thing was kind of the fact that our immediate friends, we were kind of split almost by these different kind of categories. Trauma bonding is an accurate term because the people I think when you go through stuff like that at work, you're already friends with all these people. Sometimes you're friends outside of work. Sometimes you're just really good, great colleagues, but you can't help but get to become a closer-knit group because you've been through something awful together. Yeah.
Do you feel you took a lot of lessons from that and how you processed? Because it sounds like you've got a pretty good concept of what happened. You're definitely appreciative of the fact that, yes, it was tough, but obviously open-minded to the holistic view of you didn't die, so life's pretty good. And we had Australian government support in Australia for a lot of people, which is obviously very handy. But do you feel you've learnt things that you still kind of put in practice to your current life, or do you reckon we've shelved all that and we're vulnerable again to the mental side of change?
That's a great question. I feel like parts of it maybe you regress. I feel like there were some things that happened during COVID that were so healthy. I think a genuine appreciation for life. I think the quietness, the sense that we got to have a lot more time to some of us, obviously in my circumstances, I had a lot more time to just be, to be at home, to be bored, to read and things like that. And I think I remember when things started to get busy again after COVID, I was lamenting and rejoicing. Like, I was sad that we'd lost this kind of sense of like, you know, I have a weekend and I can kind of do whatever, and it's just going to be truly restful and not filled with things. But then also, like, I was so happy to be able to go see my mates and you know, go cross the border and you know, go do things. I think that lesson has been unlearned, that sense of like, it was good to slow down, and it's good for the world, like in terms of like our natural environment as well. Like that period was, I think those lessons we've kind of forgotten a little bit maybe already. But I do hope that there's more of a genuine appreciation for the fact that people really banded together. Like I feel like I know that if shit really hit the fan, just for me, that there would be people who would help, you know, because I remember like some of the people that I was friends with who didn't have the same issues. They could continue their work. Maybe they had different issues, you know, but money stresses and the stresses of losing your profession were not one of them.
Yeah.
And, you know, they sent me fruit boxes and they sent me tea, and, you know, they couldn't be there physically, but they would always be checking in and making sure I was okay. So I feel like the biggest thing that it taught me is like that power of having those really strong relationships in that community, and that they'll be there no matter what, provided you nurture them, of course, but they'll be there when you need them. Yeah.
That's a big thing in life, isn't it? Is you don't have to be active with your friends all the time, but understanding that relationships are things that you should nurture and check in with people, and just like, yes, we're all busy in different things, but being able to actually, you know, take the time to send a message here and there, and just go, hey, like, I know you're still here and I'm thinking of you, and letting you know, like, I try, and if I think of someone in a day,
try and message them.
I just message them.
I love that. I love that.
There's a reason
that
your mind or body thought of them in that day.
Yeah.
And it can make a big difference.
Yeah. I try and do that with some people. I don't do it as often as I'd like. There's certain people in particular that I know have it tough, and if I do think of them, I'll often send them a message and just be like, I am thinking of you today. I just, you know, you just popped into my mind, and I hope you're doing all right.
Yeah.
You know, I think we underestimate how important it is to just check in with people, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. It's huge. Like the power of just being someone's friend is enormous, and the power of communicating to that person that you think of them.
Yeah, and not even expecting anything reciprocally.
No, absolutely.
Just being like, I'm just thinking of you.
Yeah.
I don't expect you to even reply.
Yeah.
I just want you to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you said that, because I try and live that way. Like I basically put out what I would like to receive. If I don't receive it, I have no
animosity.
Yeah. It's just pure, I just want to put it out there, and I hope that it changes people's lives in a positive way. But I've thought about it over the years and been comfortable with. I've invested in a lot of friendships over the years that I definitely get less than what I put in, but I'm comfortable with that, and I choose to put the amount of effort or time that I do with absolutely zero expectation of receiving.
Yeah. You know, and I think those people make the best friends, because like I've had friendships in the past where people, you know, that there were problematic friendships, maybe when I was very young, and there's this sense of like, you know, they're transactional. Like they want, like, why don't you? And you're like, well, you know, you could too. Like it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
But I think the strongest relationships you have are, you know, like you and I might not talk for 6 months, and then you send you a message and it's like old times, you know, talking crap.
Yeah.
I feel like those friendships where there is no expectation of it has to be tit for tat, you know, like sometimes I'm going to be the one that's, you know, reaching out, and I'm in a better place, and you know, I'm going to be the one that's lifting us both up. And sometimes it might be you. Yeah. I in my experience, that's a great foundation for friendships, is just respecting that, or just appreciating that, you know, it's not a transaction. It is just like, you just want to give, and you just are hoping that they'll give back. I don't know if that's the best way of phrasing it, but you know what I mean.
I think it's unconditional.
Yes.
Like I'm giving my friendship with absolutely zero expectation of receiving benefit.
Yeah.
I think, and it's just, it's a healthy way to be. Like if you're doing something, it could be anything, could be work, could be personal.
Wanting something in return.
Wanting something in return, it's just dangerous. It's dangerous for your health. And obviously I think people can feel that.
Yeah.
If you're kind of like, hey, I'm trying to like
get something out of you. Yeah.
It's kind of like,
I think people are they're very clever. Like bullshit alarms are pretty strong, you know. Like if someone's worming their way into your DMs and they clearly have an agenda and they never check in the rest of the time, most people are just going to send you on your way anyway. Yeah. They don't really want to hear about it.
No, exactly. And it's like, it's also being real. Like if you do have an agenda, put that
direct.
in your first point of contact.
Yeah.
Don't be like, oh, hey.
Oh, so.
And then get into it. Just be like, hey, I thought of this today. I was wondering if you can help me out, blah, blah, blah. Like people respect that so much more than like, that text was just trying to lead to this text.
Yeah,
right.
I think that comes down to operating with a set of, like, with integrity. Like it's, because I feel like if you're doing that, it's because you're trying to like weasel something, right? Like you're not really, it's not even that what you're seeking is bad. It's just, if you feel like you have to hide something in a layer of other stuff, there's something you need to check back in and be like, am I operating with integrity right now? Am I doing this for the right reason? Or I don't know. I always try to approach everything with, in what I feel is like the right way.
Yes.
Like don't try and, if you feel yuck about it, if you're trying to hide it, there's something wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listening to your own alarm bells.
Yeah.
Even if you're the one who's trying to want something.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it feels uncomfortable, call it out to yourself.
Exactly.
And then just figure out from there. Yeah.
Yes.
That's funny. Now, I'm very excited by this one. Mm-hmm. You are an outdoor fiend.
Yep.
Where did this come from? Who inspired you to love the outdoors? And what has made you become a badass four-wheel driver?
I'm not a badass.
You are a badass. It looks rad on socials. It looks so good. Yeah, it does look really good on the front lawn.
Where did it come from? You know what? I reckon just growing up, we used to have I think we grew up on like a couple of acres, and we had this like big eavesment between us and the other houses in our estate, and all the kids used to go down into the bush and we'd dig cubbies in the dirt and make jumps on bikes and, you know, make mud pies or whatever. And so I think we were just always outside. We used to go camping a little bit when I was a kid, but it was always to like the local Big Four, you know, or down by the river and that. And, you know, we'd go out in the tinny and stuff. But I just think it was childhood. Like we got to spend a lot of time outside, and I really enjoyed that time, whether it was riding bikes with my brother down the road, or whether it was, you know, playing at the beach and things like that. I just like being outside. In terms of, I don't know what the rest of your question. It was a 3-part question.
Stop asking so many questions.
No.
So childhood was definitely outdoors for you.
Yeah.
And you lived on a bit of space.
Yeah, we had a bit of land, yeah.
Okay. So now your journey, I feel that from what I've seen on your social media is that you love camping, four-wheel driving, being out.
Yeah. Doesn't matter what form. I'll take it in any form. Like even my mum and I did last year, we did Alaska together, right? And it was, the compromise is that it was cruise, because mum, you know, was like, she's not like me in that regard. But the day trips we did were like, hey mum, you want to go kayak in some glaciers, or do you want to go, you know, dog sledding, or do you want to go on ATVs in the back of Denali National Park? Like, I just love being outside. I feel like these days, like when my partner and I think kind of fed each other. So when we first started, you know, being a couple, we'd go out on like little trips, right? And you might go camping on the weekend, just to somewhere small, you know, quite easy, quite attainable, quite local. And I just love being outside. There's just something about it. It just fills my cup. It just, you know, reminds me to breathe and to enjoy myself. And then what happens is it kind of snowballs. Like, you know, you do that, and then you're like, you see people doing these, like going to these amazing places, and you realize, hey, I can do that. Like that's attainable. Like there's no reason why I can't go to Cape York. Of course I can go to Cape York. You know, let's go. Let's do it. And then you get there, and it's so remote. Like these places that we go these days, like, you know, the Cape was remote. The Simpson is my favorite place I've ever been, like the Simpson Desert. And, you know, when you look at people who aren't outdoorsy and you say, so, you know, we spend 4 days, we're driving between 15 and 20 Ks for 4 days on end. Like that's the kilometre, like the speed, the max speed we can reach is 20 Ks. So you're going bloody slow. It's wombat holes, so you're being tossed the whole time. And you're crossing 900 dunes for 400 Ks, right? So it's just cresting a dune after dune. And people are like, wow, that sounds real boring. Like just 900 Ks of just cresting dunes. But it's just, there's something about it. It's just real, and it's so hard to articulate. Like it doesn't matter how many times I try to say to someone what is special about these places and why they pull you in. It's just like you're so far away from everywhere and you're so aware of how small you are in the world and how natural and untouched and raw the place you are is. And there's almost this sense of this thrill as well. I think maybe I'm an adrenaline junkie, but in like a really moderate sense. But there's this sense of this thrill of like, okay, well, the place you are, like you are on your own and you have to be really self-sufficient and independent and you have to be prepared. And it can be a really serious, like it could if stuff goes wrong, you're on your own. Like, you know, you're out there and you have to be able to fend for yourself in terms of first aid, everything. Like you have to be able to get a car out if it gets stuck. You have to be able to fix it if it breaks down. Obviously you can, you know, you've got a beacon and you can always signal for services, but it's a last resort. You know, it's going to be very expensive and time resources and you're going to be on the news. Yeah. No one wants that. No one wants that.
You're going to get a letter saying, please donate to us as well afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like there's kind of, I don't know, there's this sense of just it being a big adventure. And maybe I'm just an adventure junkie. I just love being outside and just doing things and pushing myself and finding out where my limit is and you know, I just love natives, like natural sort of spaces as well. I just love being outside.
So, and you got a new car in the last year. Mm-hmm. That sounded like it was a long time dream.
Yeah. So I have always been into cars. Mum sent me a picture the other day and it was a photo of me in front of my 3rd birthday cake and it was a car. I wanted a car birthday cake. And my favourite childhood toy growing up, did you ever watch Johnson and Friends on ABC? You might be a little bit older than me. It was basically a TV show and it was set in a kid's bedroom and I had the toy truck. Like that was my toy growing up. I had this toy truck called Diesel. I realised serendipitously he was a red ute and has like he was wearing like a little baseball cap. So he has like a little visor.
I do remember that actually.
Yeah. So that was my like favourite toy growing up and Mum and Dad said they bought it for me because I had an imaginary one and they couldn't keep track of the imaginary one. So they bought me a real Diesel so that they knew where Diesel was because Diesel kept getting left behind at all the shops we'd go to. So they bought me a real car. So I've always been obsessed with cars. Yeah.
Your parents not only just having to raise children, they had to deal with imaginary toys being left at shops. You are a pest.
I know. The pain in the ass. Yeah, it gives you an appreciation for your own kids.
God, we've never lost any imaginary toys yet. Yeah, please no. You're not allowed to talk to my children.
Please refrain from saying, see yourself out.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I don't know what it is. I've just always loved cars and I'm not super mechanically minded. Like my partner always says I don't give myself enough credit. I'm pretty good. I know a lot of bits and pieces, but I'm not the kind of person who can get into an engine bay and really troubleshoot proper mechanical problems. And so I don't know what it is. I've always just had this real affinity for vehicles. And I remember when I was younger, so like my first car was an old Volkswagen Beetle and my second car was also an old Volkswagen Beetle, but a real pretty one. And I remember I grew up, right? And it wasn't that I stopped loving that car, but, you know, I've got stories of like, I'd be driving and the headlights would die. And the only way to keep the headlights on was to pull the indicator, which was like the headlight flash lever, pull it and hold it towards you. So I was driving home and I'd be like holding the indicator and driving and you'd go to change gears and you have to let go of it, change the gears so your lights go out. And then you have to quickly, like you're going around a corner and you're like, crap, I've got to get the lights back. So like I had to like, in a sense, kind of grow up and get a real person's car. So I sold that and I probably had like a 10-year period of having like a very reliable, very normal hatchback. I called it a sponge cake is kind of how it's a reliable cake. You know people will eat it, but it's not really going to set anyone's heart aflutter, you know? And so I wanted I've always, for the longest time I've really liked four-wheel drives, but I've always just liked cars that have a bit of character and I really wanted an old four-wheel drive. But then, COVID, four-wheel drive prices went up. And so I was like, my partner was like, you know what, just just buy a new one. Just get one that you love, that you're going to like. I joke that mine makes the least sense on paper. It doesn't have cup holders, or it has a cup holder. It doesn't have a center console. It's just carpet. Like it's real old school inside. Wow. They've been producing it in the same form for is it nearly 30 years? It's quite a long time that they've been producing essentially that shell of a car. Yeah. So it's very rudimentary, but it just it makes me feel good. It's just something about it.
Well, what gives the year, the make, the model? Tell it.
It's so because people are probably like, what's this car? This magical mythical car. It's nothing special for some people. It's a 2023 Land Cruiser 70 series. So it's the wagon, which is a 76. It's like a mid-sized, it looks big and beefy from the outside. The tyres have something to do with that. But when you hop in, it's actually quite a mid-sized four-wheel drive. It's quite small. Yeah. The thing for me is, so we did this brand shoot last year, right? This shoot for our current brand campaign. And it was the first time I'd taken it properly anywhere. Like we took it to the beach because got to be one of the talent on the campaign. In my world, vehicles are talent. So it got to be one of the talent. Isn't that funny?
Yeah. It doesn't talk back.
No, it doesn't talk. She's quite a diva. But yeah, red M&Ms in her trailer. So I took it off road, and it's the sense of freedom you get in a vehicle that will take you anywhere. Like it will go anywhere, literally. Like, well, maybe not underwater, but if I wanted to head to WA tomorrow, I know that it'll take me there, and I could go pretty much any route, and it's more than capable. It's like freedom with four wheels is how I would describe it. There's something about it that's so, it's like speaks to the escapist in me. Yeah. I don't know.
That's cool.
Yeah. And, like we've got 2 4-wheel drives now. And the thing that I've always warred with is this. So my partner has one and I have one. And there's this sense of like, his is very much in the shed most of the time, and it's like our dedicated adventure vehicle. So we'll take that out if we're going on a real long haul trip at the moment, because his car's better kitted out. And I often struggle. I think the biggest thing that I struggle with is this kind of dichotomy between, like, I drive a 4-wheel drive and I know that this is like environmentally not necessarily like the greatest, right? Like but it's a sense of like, okay, right now there's not many compelling alternatives on the market that are sustainable and good for the environment. I know they'll come. I know they're on their way. The US has some great ones already, like Rivian, and that there's some real up and coming startups that are doing really cool 4-wheel drives, not Cybertrucks, but like really cool looking 4-wheel drives that are more environmentally conscious. And I always find it really interesting, and like how dealing with this kind of sense of this war of like, I have this vehicle to go and explore outdoor spaces, but the vehicle itself isn't necessarily the best mode of doing that. Yes. And I just think I don't love the complexity of that, but I think it's so interesting to examine that complexity of like, okay, well, how do you balance it? I live in hope that one day there'll be these amazing 4-wheel drives that can take us anywhere, that you can take across the desert, and they're an electric car, and that you're going to be able to get there. But it's interesting.
I think in its current, where the world is currently, I think it's okay to choose happiness whilst being respectful in the other parts of your life that you can change.
Yeah. So, I think conscious consumption. Yeah. Like I'm aware that I'm doing that, and I try to offset it in other ways. Yeah. But it is an interesting, like when we do finally get EVs in Australia that are in the 4-wheel drive specific market, I think it's going to be fascinating because they're really powerful. They have constant drive to all 4 wheels, which is going to make them incredibly capable cars. And they talk about like you could have a solar panel in the middle of the desert, right? So you could, and no one has to man it. Yeah. So, you can pull up and you could theoretically charge your car and keep going, rather than at the moment we have to carry 10 jerry cans to be able to cross because there's no fuel stations. Yep. So anyway, it's an interesting thing, but yeah, it's my pride and joy at the moment. It's real pretty.
Now, so that leads me to an interesting question. Now, is 4-wheel driving a man's sport?
It's a great question. Yeah. It's a great question. It can be. It's getting better, I think. I'm really fortunate in that the men in my life and the women, because I think it's important for both, because both can hold prejudices. I think professionally and personally, they're all really supportive. No one ever says you can't do that. In fact, half the time, I think the only limitations that are placed on my gender are the ones that I prescribe to myself, and I go, oh, that's not for you. And then I go, wait a second, where did that come from? You know, like I'll say things sometimes, and then you realize that you're like, oh, that's an unconscious bias I didn't even know I had. You know, I'll say a phrase, and I'll be like, wait a second, if I actually examine that phrase, like, you know, like now it's you're a real man or something like that. Like those phrases are so problematic, and I think that we all kind of hold those. Even me, you don't realize the unconscious biases you have. But if I pull personal me as a four-wheel driver and professional me as like I work for a four-wheel drive manufacturer and brand, like personal me, I feel like there's nothing that no one has ever said anything to me like in terms of my friends and family that has ever been that, you know, that this is not for you as a female.
Yeah.
But I've definitely, as a consumer, gone into spaces where I feel othered, or where I feel not welcomed, or where I feel that they kind of approach you with the baseline assumption that I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And then they quickly realize, okay, actually, she may do. But most people, I think these days it's a lot better than it was, and I think we're very fortunate to stand on the shoulders of people who have obviously gone before and tried to change that status quo. And I think like it's such an evolving space. Like there's so many female creators now too, like really strong female role models who, you know, sometimes they're with their partners and they both have an equal footing, and sometimes they're females on their own. You know, there's like a really awesome diesel mechanic based in Townsville who has like a four-wheel drive, and she does content, and she's quite famous in her own right.
Okay.
And I just think role models like that are so great.
Yeah.
I think the earlier we kind of have those conversations, the better. Because I think, the challenging your own biases is one of the biggest things. Like I think, they talk about showing those, you know, they show a picture of a man and a woman to little kids, and they say which one's a doctor and which one's a nurse. You know, and they're 3. They don't know any better.
Yeah.
And it's just you're trained to go, well, that's a nurse and that's a doctor.
Yeah.
And I think unlearning that in and of in ourselves is hard. This is such a complicated question. I feel like the other thing is, like, I was talking to my boss this week about it, and my manager this week about it, and he asked, like, how does that affect my identity, being a female four-wheel driver or being someone who travels via four-wheel drive? And I feel like it's really interesting because, like I said, I'm not mechanically minded, and I think sometimes when I look at the box of being a four-wheel driver, I myself place parameters that, like, to be classed as one, I have to be both competent in terms of navigation, technical driving skill, mechanical skill, you know, understanding of the vehicle and how you build it. But I would never expect, I don't think, someone else, a man, to have all of those boxes checked. Do you know what I mean? For me to feel that he can call himself that.
Yeah.
But for some reason, for myself, I don't allow myself the same grace that I can know all the destinations, and I have been to all of them. Maybe I haven't been behind the wheel for the whole time, but I've been to them all. I've been in the car. I've been the one that's navigated us or planned the route or set up camp, or, you know, I've helped problem solve things. But I don't allow myself to go, okay, well, I can call myself that.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an interesting thing to examine in yourself, like why I don't allow myself to do that.
I would definitely examine that, because you should not feel that way.
I know, but isn't it interesting though, like that we do that to ourselves, that
Absolutely.
we feel like you have to check all these boxes before I can wear that badge. But I don't say to someone else, you must do the same.
It's interesting that you say that, you know, you're saying you should be mechanically minded, know, you know, navigation, all this troubleshooting stuff. I don't think I've ever looked at a man driving a four-wheel drive and thought any of that.
No, and I think that of anyone else. You know, like I don't. My partner.
You're such a bastard to yourself.
I know, I'm not horrible to myself. I say this all the time, actually. Like my partner, if I said to him, "Do you know which route we did on this day?" He wouldn't know. He couldn't look at a map and tell me. But for me, it's almost like I have this very traditional view of, like, to fit into this label, I must understand the mechanics of something, or I must understand all of the facets of it. And I feel like that's sometimes women in general can, like, this is generalizing and I probably shouldn't, but I know that they say that women often don't apply or put themselves up for roles because they don't have 100% of the line items on a CV. But sometimes it's been found that men will, even if they have 50 to 70%, you know, that kind of like loose analogy.
Yep.
And I feel like I do that to myself with allowing myself to wear this badge with pride that, you know, I'm a four-wheel driver and I've done all these amazing trips. And I literally drive a four-wheel drive every day. I've fitted it out to my specifications. Nothing in that is anyone else's taste but mine.
Yep.
And I live and breathe it every day, and I help steer products for four-wheel drive consumers, and yet I still don't allow myself to wear that label. Like, I still don't. I still in the back of my head have this little sense of like imposter syndrome with regards to that label. It's so interesting to me that I do that to myself.
You're so mean. You
know.
are so mean. I was listening at a keynote this week for International Women's Day, and the lovely presenter, the person presenting the keynote, she was talking, she's a very high-powered pharmaceutical investor, owner, all sorts of things. But she was talking about women in relation to asking for raises. And she was saying in her experience that women will come to the meeting and be like, oh, look, I've done like pretty good this year. Like, here's some examples of how I've helped the business. Like, you know, can I have a raise? Versus, and she was saying in most cases the men would come to those meetings and say, I've done this, I've benefited the business like this is what I want. Yeah. And she was saying, who is it easier to say no to?
Yeah, the female.
And she was saying that as a female herself. So she was wanting women to be more confident and
knowing their worth
and being confident to put that out there. So the reason I'm interested with that, particularly with the four-wheel drive, is say when I'm driving around here, I'll often see four-wheel drives that are either completely decked out in pink or things that are definitely, I feel, trying to say, hey, this is mine, not his.
Yes.
And there's even stickers that say, hers, not his.
Yeah, I get why those exist.
Yeah, I just find that fascinating because there probably is that unconscious bias of, men four-wheel drive but like, it troubles me that women feel they need to put that on a sticker to say, you know,
I can do this too.
Yeah, it's like I just want you. I want women to feel that they can just do whatever, and it shouldn't matter what I think.
It's interesting you mentioned the stickers because I think like a lot of women cop a lot of flack for those stickers, right? I don't personally have one on my car because I almost feel like sometimes they have the reverse effect and that they feed in that it kind of reinforces that this is a man's thing, and in order for it to be a female thing, it has to be pink and it has to say hers, not his, to a degree. But I get why they do it, because when you're a minority in a space, right, and you might feel othered, or you might feel like you have to prove your worth, you do come against those kind of things where people just assume, they assume that it's your husband's, or they assume that it's your partner's, or they assume that you're not capable. And I feel like they're trying to like erect a flag that says this is mine and I can do this, and consequently sometimes they come under fire for doing it. It's I agree, it's sad that people feel that they have to so heavily advertise or mark something as being their own just so that they feel that people understand them or want to include them. Like I understand why they exist.
We will get there one day.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Leaps and bounds from where I'm sure we were like 10, 20 years ago. I work in the place that I work. There are women in so many of the core roles as well. Like, and I always find it really interesting. Like, we'll get a DM from someone on social media, and they'll be like, "Hey, fellas," and I'll be like, "You don't know that all of the women, like all the people that are actually reading this message, I think they're more women than men that are reading that message. But because it's a four-wheel drive brand, they kind of assume, and it's just." We've come a long way, I think, but as all things, we've still got some way to go.
Well, that's a tip that I use is I say, "Hey team," to any email I'm sending out. It's "Hey team."
Hey team.
It's just it covers everyone.
I say "Hi folks" sometimes, and I feel a little bit like I'm like, "Hey folks, that's
and you
all, folks."
Put a little emoji of a banjo. That's so cool. All right, sorry, that's not so cool. This chat is so cool. Women being sexist. No, terrible. Cutting. The last kind of I think I could talk to you all day, but
You've
my,
got kids
my
upstairs.
children are like, get out of the last thing I want to kind of broach with you is mental health and supporting others and the internet. I kind of feel that is a massive little torrent of doom and positivity and excitement and sadness all in one little jam jar. So...
An IXL jam jar?
An IXL jam jar. We won't go into that. My God. You got the same imagery straight away?
Unfortunately.
Best gift I've ever given, by the way. I hope that was a very sweet Christmas.
It was. I love it. Not for the reasons that the original person did, but...
Not for the hospital-bound reasons, yes.
For the toast.
I want to know, do you actively process your mental health and practice things to ensure that, as someone very active on the internet and social media, that you're protecting yourself and ensuring that you safely use social media, I guess is my question.
This is really hard. So I go through waves, I think, with this sort of thing. I went through a phase where I was like, I don't want it anymore. Like, I don't want social media anymore. I'm done with it. I want to cut ties. Realistically, I don't know who I was kidding when I go through those phases, because I need it for my job. Like, I literally need it for my job. I run businesses on Facebook and Instagram. There's no way I can opt out, right? So by extension of that sort of feedback loop, you have to go back with, okay, well, how can I interact with it in a healthy way? I think for me, it's limiting my time on them. So trying not to get into like spirals of spending too much time on them. But I do think that, like what you touched on, is like, how do you self-manage and how do you process? I think that's something I'm always learning, is like, how do I manage the way in which I interact with the internet? You know, if consciously following and unfollowing places that are you know, oh, that made me feel bad. Actually examining, okay, well, that didn't help me. And, you know, or that, you know, that might have been confronting, but, you know, maybe that's something I needed, or that might have been confronting and right now I need to protect my energy because I'm not in a great space.
Yes.
I think it's really important that you don't just mindlessly use the internet or social media without checking in with how it's making you feel.
Yes, definitely.
And I think that, like, finding the tools or taking time to do things that consciously sort of take you away from it and make you feel good. So like self-care and things like that is really important. I try these days to really curate what I consume a little bit more, and not in the sense that sounds like I'm not allowing like diverse voices to come in, but more ensure that, like, if something is contradictory to what I would assume is a good or a progressive thing to think about, or how can I phrase this better? I think that if something comes up on my feed and it's not conforming to my beliefs, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's good to be challenged, right? And to have content that comes up and you go, wait a second, that's really made me think and made me challenge my assumptions. I think that's really good.
Yep.
I think social media does that great sometimes, because people are constantly trying to self-evaluate. And I think following more of those things can be good. But I also think that if you get something that comes up and you're like, actually, that made me feel bad about my self-image, or that made me feel awful about, you know, a particular attribute of me that is a protected attribute, you know, so something like my gender or my I'm not a religious person, but or your religious beliefs or something like that. Like, if something is really affronting you and isn't beneficial, I think it's important to make sure that you protect the space that you're in. That's a challenging line to walk, protecting yourself and also remaining open to being challenged. Yes. And not assuming that you know the right thing.
Totally.
I think in terms of like preserving mental health, it's just limiting time. I actually have timer apps on my phone, because I find that, you know, I don't always exercise the right amount of self-control. I can just end up on too much and, you know, like I can end up swiping for too long. But I think that that it's kind of a reminder to be like, actually, sorry, you've reached a 15-minute allotment for the day, and now it's time to go do something else.
It can be a vacuum, can't it?
It can. I think sometimes I can be guilty of not switching off. So because my phone is also a conduit to like the Instagram and Facebook and accounts for our business, I can very easily get pulled into like being like, oh, cool, like that person's messaging about something and what they're doing is really awesome, and I'm just enthusiastic and want to engage. But I think that as I get older, I get better at self-managing both my personal and professional use of those tools, and kind of then when I'm not using them, not thinking that I have to make that time away productive, because that's traditionally what I've done. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not working there, so I need to be working over here, and I need to be, I'm not self-improving there, so I need to be like listening to an audiobook, and that's, you know, about self-improvement in some regard. Or I need to be, you know, I think as I get older, I get better at going, okay, well, I'm not doing that, and now some time for me to just be a mindless vegetable, you know, like kind of just allowing myself some grace to be not consciously always productive is really important.
I've talked about this before, not with you, but I think we've lost the art of being able to be bored.
Doing nothing.
Yeah,
it's pivotal. Yeah, I think well, they say like it's the moments when you have nothingness that you're able to come up with very creative ideas. Like you have to do nothing to be creative. I think that's partly why I really like being going remote.
I can imagine,
because like when we go to the desert, you have 6 days and you can't use your phone. There is no choice, you know, and you don't have the ability to there's no need, like, you don't even feel the need to check it. It's funny how quick you fall into the rhythm of you don't need to be tethered to the rest of the world. You can just be, you know, and I think that's so important to make those times. And I think that is also partly why I have an affinity for those places, because you're so, like they talk about, there was this great campaign that was launched, I think maybe by Great Northern, and it was like basically to protect the places in the world that have no Wi-Fi or no service or no cell service, no range. Because one day they talk about, and I dread this day, that one day there will be nowhere in the world where you can't get service.
Yeah.
And for some people that's their idea of heaven. But for me, that's my idea of hell. I just think it's so funny because I shouldn't have to escape to turn off, but there is an element of this, it's this forced sense of escapism. And I don't know, I think mental health and its relation to the internet is something where it's an evolving, it's always evolving. I haven't worked it out. I don't know if anyone has. You know what I mean?
It's too new, right? Like we are literally the guinea pigs for how, as a society, being so connected and so informed and so stimulated is the effect on that.
You know what's interesting too is I feel like in the early days of like, so, you know, I remember being on Instagram very, very early on, right? Like way, like really early. And I'm not usually an early adopter of things, but it's one of the few things that I was, because it was photos and I really liked it. And one of my friends hopped on and we were the only two people that we knew on there. And I loved it back then. And you used to get this real, they talk about that like sense of when you're a creative and you're creating things and you get this like high from the likes or this high, you know, from creating things. And as the platform has changed, the whole, like it's your relationship with it has changed. Like people in the beginning, you would find random people, and I used to have relationships with people that were in America, like on, you know, just purely online. It was almost like a little chat room, but with photos. And it's different now. You don't really build that. I don't think you build the same sense of community on there, but my relationship with it has not just in that regard has changed, but like I used to create things and you'd put them out there and you'd get the sense of validation. And I feel like more and more these days, I'm like, why did I ever do that? Why don't I put things on there just for me? Like nowadays, I'm just like, you know, one day I'm going to post something about this, another day I'm going to do something about that. I might not share anything for 12 months. The other day I put up a story where I was going fanatical about spiders, and then afterwards I cringed at myself for doing it. And then I was like, you know what? That's who I am.
It was awesome.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing, right? You're like, you do it and then you're like, oh God, what are these people are going to think I'm insane.
Yeah.
I think it kind of like, in a way, allowing yourself to just make stuff, like just creating things is a good way to just accept who you are. Like just put it out there and be okay with it, and that's who you are. And I don't know. I think that's something that I'm constantly learning about myself. Is like I'll put something out, and if it resonates with people, that's great, and if it doesn't, that's also great, because it's just who I am.
Yeah. You know what it is? It's as simple as long as you're doing it for you, it's the right path, right? And it's, if you're doing it for others, that's when it becomes this minefield, because it's just, you second guess yourself, you're worried about, you know, the likes or whatever. Yeah. So if we can just practice doing everything we do for ourselves, it's probably going to be a good path.
It's going to be true to yourself then, isn't it? It's not going to be misshapen or formed by the expectations or what you perceive the expectations of someone else to be.
Yes.
It's just going to be purely for you.
It is a minefield. It's an absolute minefield. But that draws us to the end of today's little chat. And I'm so grateful for you spending time with me. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.
I get to cut it up now. So. But I'm very grateful, and I hope we get to do it again one day. And maybe the next one we can go into whatever your next forward driving adventure is when you get to disconnect and disappear.
Yeah.
Maybe we can go into a long, deep detail of that fabulous trip.
Yeah. WA, I think, is next on my list. So I want to spend a few months offline in WA.
Yeah, nice.
That'd be a long chat.
So is WA in Australia? Because I think Australia's only the East Coast, isn't it?
It certainly feels like it as an East Coaster, doesn't it? It's like a whole other world over there.
Yeah. Well, now that Taylor's only come to Melbourne and Sydney, the rest of us don't exist either. So Taylor Swift is the new Atlas.
Yeah. Taylor's map of Australia.
Taylor's map. Anyway, all right. Lovely to talk with you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Bye-bye.
Likewise. Bye.